Hey everybody, I'm Adam, and this is Think Club. Will trans athletics destroy the atheist community again? Atheism plus, many of you probably remember, was when the feminism destroyed the atheist community already. So I think this was circa 2012, maybe, Atheism Plus. Don't quote me on that, but so in this video, I'm going to try to offer a new conceptual lens to view this dispute. And for my longtime fans, obviously, you'll know this is not a new conceptual lens for us. This is kind of the lens that we always look at this stuff through. But I notice a lot of people are making response videos to this, and none of them are kind of incorporating this conceptual lens, which is just the perfect lens to look at this stuff, and why I think that pretty much no one is going to change their minds on this dispute. So just to give a quick recap, first of all, I'm going to play some clips from Becoming Human, Michael Tomasello's new book, which is amazing, which the two clips that I have go into the evolutionary origins of these communities and kind of how we reflexively embody our culture, which is super interesting. So I have those clips I'm going to play for you. And then I'm also going to relate it, obviously, to moral foundations theory, which people seem to like a lot. This lens of moral foundation theory is super helpful. And I have the social intuitionist model again. And my argument is going to be that many people have already made their judgments. As you can see, the triggering event. Well, let me give the background here first before I get into that. So the background here is Rationality Rules made a video. Rationality Rules, Stephen Woodford, I guess he's got two names going now, made a video endorsing the idea that trans athletes, particularly biological men, should not be competing in women's competition. Evidently, maybe he got some of the science wrong. That's really immaterial for my way of looking at this. But the video was met with a lot of jeers. People did not like this video. He got a lot of backlash for it. And he actually went on the Atheist Experience show. Many people called him out, evidently, and the Atheist Experience backtracked on having it on. They released a statement saying that they disavow, they don't want to be associated with Rationality Rules because of his mean and transphobic video. Essence of Thought is a player here. He's a small YouTuber that actually made a response video to Rationality Rules saying where he got the science wrong. And Noel Plum has also made response videos. I'm not sure if he's made response videos to Essence of Thought, but I know he's made a couple to Rationality Rules. The Non Sequitur show had Erin on where they discussed the situation. They actually talked about other things more than they really discussed the situation. But my point in making this hopefully short video is that I want to talk about what's really going on here, because people are talking about the fracturing of the atheist community, and there's really a conflict in values that make up the atheist community. Jordan Peterson often talks about the hierarchy of values. And these communities, according to Haidt's research, form around a highest value. That highest value is kind of the third rail of the community, the value that you cannot question in that community without grave risk of being thrown out of this community. And if you know, and I've talked about this before in other videos, like Christianity is a moral community that has a highest value. The highest value is Jesus died for our sins, that we are imperfect human beings. And through this act of grace, forgiving us, we can become perfect. We can strive towards perfection. But a lot of striving towards perfection is realizing that we are imperfect beings. And I think this idea, obviously, it has a supernatural element to it that a lot of people don't like, especially in the atheist community. But that supernatural element, I think, kind of makes it impervious to irrelevance, impervious to not being relevant any longer, because it's really based in this this other realm, where this other dispute that's going on, the trans athletics dispute, is very much grounded in this realm. But if you have a value that is in conflict with something that is grounded in the real world, something that we can study and prove that value is somehow incorrect, then you risk your entire community, because that community depends upon that value being true. Otherwise, there's no need for the community. So this dispute has spawned tons of response videos and lots of talk about statistics and whether or not trans men are really women, and the science of whether or not they should be able to compete. And I want to throw kind of all of that to the side, because my argument is really, and it goes back to this argument of Jonathan Haidt's with social intuitionism, is that these judgments are made ahead of time. There's a triggering event that happens, okay? And that triggering event activates somebody's intuition on whether or not this is right or wrong. The judgment is made, the judgment is in, and then we rationalize that judgment after the fact, post hoc. That's what post hoc reasoning is. So the moral judgments, I think, have already been made about this trans athletes competition thing. And now all of the science stuff that they're talking about, all of this other stuff, they're just trying to justify their position, the rationality of their position. But that's not going to change the fact that these values are in conflict. And that's why I'm going to specifically highlight these values here, because the values that are in conflict there's three of them. Objective truth, scientific truth, because if we find the scientific truth undermines a value, then obviously we have to either throw scientific truth under the bus or the value under the bus. And the value is caring for a marginalized community, caring for the trans people, the trans people that will suffer because they are going to be excluded from these competitions, the trans females, the biological men transitioning to women who will be excluded from these events are a marginalized community. And progressivism, the whole idea behind progressivism is protecting marginalized communities. So the care for marginalized communities is a value. And I would argue that is the highest value in the progressive community. And this is why the progressive community is often in conflict with the atheist community, because I would argue that a large part of the atheist community perceives objective scientific truth as the highest value. I would categorize me in that in that community, even though I'm on the outs with most of the atheist community. I would still say truth is my highest value. That is what I am looking for. And there's a third value here, care for the institution of women's sports, which is, even Rationality Rules says in his video, if we put the value, and he doesn't phrase it this way, I'm paraphrasing, and obviously you can correct me if you think I'm incorrect in the comments below, but Rationality Rules makes a comment in his video that a lot of the other people don't like. I think Godless Cranium didn't like this comment. I know Essence of Thought didn't like this comment. But he said that the institution of women's sports is on the line, that if we allow trans women to compete in women's sports, that institution will effectively be destroyed. What I'm saying here is these values are in conflict in this situation, and therefore you are forced to take a side. You're forced to say, which is the highest value here, which is my highest value. So I'll play these clips from Becoming Human, The Theory of Ontogeny by Michael Tomasello. And the first clip, he's talking about an explanation for developmental psychology.
Sociality. Living in a modern human cultural group meant, above everything else, conforming. One had to conform to coordinate with others in conventional cultural practices, to advertise one's identity with the cultural group's way of doing things, and to be in line with the group's social norms. Some social norms were only about conformity and group identity, but others touched on humans' senses of sympathy and fairness, inherited from early humans, and these became moral norms. And so, just as conventional norms codified the right and wrong way of doing things in instrumental activities, moral norms codified the right and wrong way of treating other people morally. Because the collective intentionality and cultural common ground of modern humans created a kind of objective perspective on things, modern human morality came to be characterized as objective right and wrong. Of course, one could act against moral norms, but when called to task by other group members, the options were limited. One could ignore their criticism and censure and so place oneself outside the norms and values shared by the cultural group, perhaps leading to exclusion from the group, or
that's exactly what's going on here. Rationality rules stepped out of line, and now they're threatening to exclude him from the group. He didn't parrot the actual moral norms of the community. His norm of scientific objectivity trumped the moral norm of care for the rights of this marginalized group. Those values came into conflict, and now there is a rift over which value will be the highest value of the community. The community might split, which, I mean, that's what it normally does, because these people aren't even talking about these values in an objective sense.
Or one could accept it as legitimate and deserved. And indeed, modern humans did think of the cultural norms into which they were born as a legitimate means by which we regulate us, and it was part of their group identity to think in this way. This meant that when one deviated from the group's social norms, it was important to justify this deviation to others in terms of the shared values of the group. For example,
Yeah, see, and this is what's going on here. Rationality rules is justifying his behavior. He's even gone as far as retracting parts of the video and saying that he completely got it wrong. He's trying to get into their good graces. He's trying to do that balancing act between the science and the objective truth of the matter and the care for the rights of this marginalized group, trans people.
Neglected my duties because I needed to save a child in trouble. In this way, modern humans internalized not only moral actions but moral justifications, and so created a reasoned-based moral identity within the moral community. Executive regulation.
And the next clip that I have here is very interesting as well.
Just as scientists hold on to their core theoretical beliefs by construing or interpreting empirical evidence in particular ways, individuals may maintain a sense of core moral identity, despite committing what others believe are immoral acts, by interpreting the situation creatively.
By interpreting the situation creatively. And there's a lot of creative interpretations of this situation going on now. But what I would like to point out is that all of these interpretations fit in with the original intuition that each of these individuals had. Nobody is changing positions on this. The intuition that they have come to the debate with is the intuition that they're going home with. And all they're doing is rationalizing post hoc reasoning through that intuition.
But the creativity of interpretation has its limits. Since one's moral identity is socially constructed, one must always be prepared to justify, both to others and to the self, why one chose one course of action over another. As previously argued, justification means showing that one's actions actually emanated from values that we all share. There thus comes to surround one's core moral identity a protective belt of interpretations and justifications, as it were.
So the moral values that we all share are very important to this group. This is what defines the group. Now, the atheist community has always run into trouble here because the moral values are potentially in conflict when you're not articulating those values specifically. A lot of the atheist community will fall back to, atheism is simply a lack of belief in God. Well, that can be a moral value. If you are saying that believing in God is harmful, which a lot of people do, that's a different moral value and a different moral community. I characterize them as the anti-theist because their highest value is that belief in God is harmful. That's the highest value. That's what unites the anti-theist community, I call them often, because their goal is to rid the world of religion because their highest value is that religion causes harm. A belief in the supernatural causes harm, physical harm to society and to the individual. That is their belief. So, but when that belief comes into conflict with scientific data that shows the opposite, the scientific data is what gets thrown aside because the highest value is what is important.
Perhaps I did not share my cookies with others as I might have, but I am ill, and need more nutrition than them at the moment. Does this justify my behavior to others and to myself? Perhaps I hit another child, but that was because she was picking on a peer. Does this justify my behavior to others and to myself? If the answer to these questions is yes, then I proceed ahead in the status quo. But if the answers are no, then my core moral identity is challenged. If I want to preserve it intact, then I must do something to repair it, such as display guilt, apologize, or make reparations. Also crucial to
See, and this is exactly where Rationality Rules is. He's been called out by the moral community, and he has to do something, which he is doing.
the process, of course, is whether an affected person is or is not a member of one's moral community, and who is the reference group for one's justifications. We might find some actions that are unacceptable when directed to an in-group member in good standing are acceptable if they are directed to an out-group member or in-group miscreant. Finally,
see, and that's where I would categorize myself. See, the Rationality Rules is an interesting situation, and I've been watching this very closely because what Rationality Rules has been accused of doing is exactly the same thing that Rationality Rules has done to other people, like particularly Jordan Peterson and myself. Like he has caused harm by mischaracterizing us, and we're on the outside of the moral community, so this makes no difference to anybody concerned. But the people inside the moral community have accused him of doing the same thing with trans people. Their argument against Rationality Rules is that he has put bad information out into the world, and that information has caused tangible harm to this marginalized group. And therefore, he needs to correct the record. Otherwise, this harm will continue to happen. Well, these marginalized communities are considered to be part of that moral community, so therefore it's a grave offense. But the tactic that Rationality Rules is exactly the same that he uses with people outside his moral community, and the moral community cheers it on. They're rah-rah for that kind of behavior because he's denigrating outgroups. So there's that component of it as well. As far as moral foundations go, the progressives are focused on the care harm foundation here. And you can see this big fat line where that is the highest value. And this is based on survey work. So Jonathan Haidt has done various survey work with self-identified progressives who, this is their highest moral value, care for the victims of the oppressed. And I just want to throw it out there to show that there is some empirical data behind that. This intuitionist model I look at quite often because I somehow feel that if people understand the unconscious intuitions and really know what is going on in these different communities, how the real things that are driving these different communities, the real motivations driving these different communities, I think we might have a better chance of getting to my highest value, which is objective scientific truth. When you understand that people have these intuitions, and those intuitions are so deeply rooted in their identity and their place inside these communities, these loosely formed communities, things seem to make a lot more sense. So I'll go ahead and leave it there. You can leave me your thoughts, obviously, in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video. Hey everybody, thanks for watching my video. I'm going to be posting daily content here on my personal channel. My main channel, Think Club, is still demonetized, and I am working on getting that fixed. If you have suggestions for topics, you can leave those in the comments below. The amazing artwork that you're seeing here was done by Steph. She is a fantastic artist, and she's working on a graphic novel that I wrote, and we will both be crowdfunding soon. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
Well, first of all, if you don't have a purpose, it isn't that your life becomes neutral in a meaningless sense. It's that your life becomes characterized by unbearable suffering. Because the baseline condition of life is something like unbearable suffering.